An interview with a modern American vampire. An interview with a modern American vampire named Montague Sebastian Sohn. This interview was conducted in Phoenix, Arizona. It is not the darkest or coldest of evenings, in fact it is springtime and the Arizona desert is just perfect for this time of year. There is a new moon, and a slight drizzle is cooling the air nicely. It is April Fool's evening and sitting in a semi-public place is where I meet with a gentleman who calls himself Montague. I won't sensationalize or make dramatic reference to whom he is and claims to be. Montague is by claim a vampire. He also is by admission, a practitioner of the dark magical arts and the occult, a volunteer with the mentally ill, a worker within the local behavioral health community, an artist, a musician, and various other things in his day-to-day life. It was by chance I was lucky enough to have the opportunity to meet with him for a brief interview and have tried to be prepared with an open mind, knowing that the opportunity to meet someone with his unique perspective is a rare thing today. For purposes of privacy and respect, nothing was discussed during this interview that could reveal the personal details of his life, where he works, lives, or the like. Truth be, that even those outside this life and its mortal coil have need to keep their world private, or at least a bit secret from the public. Privacy is not just a human issue, even vampires have need for forwarding addresses, cell phone call blocking, and even have to protect themselves from fraud or identity theft. For as Montague and I discuss, the world has many mysteries and life is as dark as any of them. So please take time to enjoy an interview with a modern American vampire. Blake, why do you believe yourself to be a vampire? Montague, asking this is like asking nothing. Often the first question from human beings about my kind is the same. About why I am a vampire, that is what they want to know, but deep down the first question is really why do I exist? For what purpose could such a thing serve? That is what I have most generally found is the most normal thing to ask of a vampire. It is the most human of questions. It is odd, so perhaps we should start with the answer. Blake, okay then Montague, tell me the answer. As a vampire, why do you think you exist? Montague, from the beginning to ending of things, all things, and nothing, there always has ever been what could be called the struggle of power and source. That is what I would first express to you about my worldly existence. The truth that all things have a beginning, and an ending, therefore all things are also nothing more than what they are. I am sure you wish to discuss am I human, am I immortal, am I insane, or simply what I say that I am, a vampire. Only for a moment, allow me to state myself just as honestly as I can, then you may inquire with all manner of questions as you wish. What I am is equally as important as it is not. Just because I may exist does not change the scheme of the universe, which I am only one small star within all constellations of power and entities that all are playing their part in the great shaping of the past, present and future, and all that is reality. Reality is more important than if I exist, if you exist, if we are human or something other. Our kith and kin are that to which we are bound, like a wolf to the pack. I am bound to the ancient ones and yet live here and now. It is in this modern age that we have wiped out nearly all of the ancient world, its way of life, its way of thinking, and we have replaced most of the ancient mythologies. We live in a new world not forged in magic and superstition, but rather one or made of reason, information, and technological progress. With this new age of mankind, we have traded in that which is considered obsolete, the ancient upgraded into the modern, for better or worse at times. Or at least that is what the human species too believes. This is the modern mythology of humankind, that we are a great herd that is unstoppable, much like the mammoths and the buffalo must have felt before the advent of human tool making, before hunting brought their numbers crashing down with evolution in their wake. We are now the greatest herd of animals ever assembled. From Neanderthal onward we set forth with the hunting and gathering of every last flower, tree and green herb of the earth mother, then domesticated every tameable beast, bird, and serpent. And when there was nothing left of the wildlife on the food chain evolutionarily, then we set upon the last great hunting and gathering of the nations. It is during the last several thousand years that the humankind has become a dominant beast above all others, and with all their might have sought like good godlike children of nature to ever move toward the light. Yes, enlightenment is the goal of all those who leave the darkness behind, and therein is the beginning for what I feel that I am here to try and say, in this discourse with you tonight. Blake, go on please. Montague, for on one side of things is the power, that which is living and alive. Life would naturally have always assumed that it was the seat of all power in this world or any other. For the living of life is being created and spawned again in every moment of the human existence. Every single second a billion babies are born just in time for a billion adults to exit their mortal coil. If only the entire species could grasp the magnitude of that. What nightmares it would bring the most rational mind. That I believe is the one major reason for my existence, as simply put as I can. I am here to balance the equation, to do with the rain, the arts, and dark magic, what could not be done with desires, faith and rituals offered to the lesser gods, especially the monstrous blind idiot god, the one monotheistic monstrosity. The first immortal, an ancient one, and my blood lineage from my first days of awareness I knew what I was, and who I did or did not serve. That was the side of power, that gave life like a pair of jumper cables to the infallible, inflatable god of thunder. First Zeus, the first Odin, then Jod, then just God. A blind idiot god, bigger and bigger as his one godhead grows through the centuries. For in that scheme of power as the grand design with which humankind took a hold of the evolutionary throne, winning the prize of conquest and dominance over the planet Earth Mother. In contrast sits the exiled first and most obvious of truths, that power came not from a mechanism of creation or earthly control, but that the power came from the source. The source of all power had to have existed first, even if only for a nanosecond, and in that autogenesis, in the beginning was the void, from which the light said let there be me. From there any number of questions start appearing to the pathfinder of logic. Asking, did light need creating, or was it the natural condition of the black light beginnings undoing the fabric of reality? Or was power a condition of life? Or was the source there first not living, unalive, and was the void dead or deathless? For if death came first, then life was servant to it. And like the living world, the dead were everywhere unseen, near but unavoidable. They had positions in every land as if a slow invasion had long been coming, not overnight, not over millennium, not even noticeable until one day. One day the dead emerge plentiful in number, such that the living are outranked by their sheer numbers alone. Montague pauses, then says, Montague, as the poet Robert Frost so aptly put, don't that make you suspicious, that the dead are keeping something back? Blake, what is a vampire? Montague, if humans worship the power, and attain material control over the world of reality daily through war, life in the game most would call progression, or the act of ever moving forward toward more and more human-like states of existence, in reverence of the holy, the gods. If human beings sought fire to survive, I on the other hand, I sought only an age of ice. The ages of the mammals and of the humankind are linked to their feasting and harvesting seasons, so are the beasts eaten, the trees bearing fruits, so it is possible to see, that humans are also like blood waiting upon time to show that they are mortal and therefore they are fruit. They are like the vine, they are also used by the universe as food for the divine. When they are in their dead cadence and decline and the long slumber of existence awakens, what is my usefulness when humans fall into the autumn of their millennium? Then I, vampire, must be the anti to that which is human aspiring to be godlike. I am the vanquished empire that never ends, that empire of nothing, what scriptures have vaguely refereed do as the vessels of iniquity. I do not hunt or gather, and I am of those for whom there will never be a nation, or numbers to be counted. I, vampire, am the fisher of gods, and the fisher of men. I devour that which is sacred. I cannot sleep, for I am ever the counter of the sheep. I am vampire, and before anything else, I am alone, and all of my kind were alone and in exile. In exile upon the planet Earth Mother, since times unknown and long forgotten. Blake, okay, but wait, back the cryptic talk up a bit. How old do you claim to be, and exactly when do you believe you became a vampire? Montague, I am currently just months into my 151st year on this planet Earth Mother. The exact date was in the winter following my 37th and last human birthday, and I have lived an additional 114 years since. I will not for obvious reasons reveal the precise true details, for my own privacy and as it is truly nobody's business but my own. I was not turned into a vampire, but rather the already inherent bloodline was awoken by a series of events in my life, some spiritual, others more worldly and personal. In fact, I now understand that I was a human being who was born with what I would guess are an older genetic marker in my DNA. Recent science is just beginning to find what will one day probably track down some ancient vampire code in the genome. For now, I understand it to be a predisposition that I had, from my family bloodline and shared with some of them who were my relatives. I was not changed into a vampire, it was just a natural progression that developed in my physiology. I believe it had been building up since my infancy, perhaps even as far back as my conception. I only have basic information about my biological parents. And being orphaned from them, I cannot tell you great details about them in relation to my first life as a human being. Blake, so, when you say that you are a vampire, what do you mean exactly? And if you are genetically predisposed to being one, or becoming one, how did that happen to you? Montague, most of what I am about to explain is far too wide of a subject to be dealt with very well in an interviewing format, but I shall try to explain in brief some of the facts. I was not born a scholar, and over time had to learn many things that my human life had not even the education to understand, but through many texts I read, I have adopted a few ideas in terms that suit my understanding of what is the best explanation for the truth behind what is mostly mythology. I have adopted terms coming from the Gnostic Gospels, the Nag Hammadi, Zoroastrian, and Vedic writings. Even so, I am using such terms and ideas loosely at best, with meanings that may be mostly my own attachment to the terms and not their literal translations originally. Keeping this in mind, I believe this. There are in essence three types of non-human bloodlines that have been coexisting on this planet for some time now. The first two are ancient and of the earth. The third is probably not. I am from the bloodline called Calyptos, or the firstborn. Most of us are old, original bloodline ancestors. We may have been or are related to the oldest original beings on this planet. But in basic terms, we share nearly all the genetic markers of what you would traditionally think of as vampire, including but not necessarily limited to, past life memories, elemental powers, ESP, telepathy or the like, and possibly shape-shifting, although I prefer to say becoming dim for I have never shifted into anything other than my own skin, or chameleon-like shifting. We also are likely to be very akin to the dark earth and its magics. Animals are somewhat at our control naturally, and we share our immortality through blood or not at all. The other two bloodlines are not vampire by my definition. Those called the protophanes, or the once born, are those who unlike myself did not inherit a pure bloodline connection. They instead are human hybrids of a sort. And how their power, connection to the earth, and if they have longer lifespans is dependent on many factors. Some protophanes may have no bloodline ancestry at all to the vampire, and are a sort of self-begotten creature. But still are more human than vampire and usually do not even truly know they have any such connections to the original Calyptos. Third are called the autogenes, what I call the star-born. They have also been called skinwalkers and other names through the centuries. I won't go into great detail for it has little to do with vampires and humans, but the autogenes are said to have originated in three possible ways. One religious view says they are fallen angels have mated with humans long ago, another would say they are from a race of slaves made by ancient aliens who possibly still reside in this world, and the oldest one says that they are not even what they seem, that they are beings from some other dimension that inhabit the bodies of their hosts. They have little in common with vampires, and are actually more akin to lycanthrope myths in their manifestation and appearance. What is often mistaken and confused between their kith and my kindred is that they are said to drink blood to keep up the possession of the bodies they inhabit. Some Voodoo and Navajo spirit possession rites are used to invoke these spirits and yet it appears they are not the true lows of the ancient Calyptos. Some exorcism rites have been carried on because of this third group. But even these are mistaken generalizations from a world that has no definition or modern understanding that these autogenes exist amongst the humankind symbiotically. The simple way to explain to a lament would be thus: Calyptos are the firstborn and are true vampires. Protophanes are once born, and are human hybrids and not true vampires. Autogenes are star-born, but are humans being used as a host by a parasite, and are not of the planet Earth Mother most likely. And of course, there are the humans and their kindred, who we have roamed amongst unseen for much longer than human history would like to know or believe. Blake, now this is somewhat different than most vampires and the subcultural communities explain themselves. Isn't there a modern vampire community view on such matters, one that focuses on how individuals feed vampirically? Montague, yes, my version has similar aspects, but there is a more scientific and linear viewpoint held by most modern vampires, or vampires. The vampire community generally agrees that in ideology, a vampire or vampire fall into one of two major classifications and a third that combines the two. These are based on how they feed. Feeding is described as a need to sustain the body, mind, and spirit by the intaking of vital life force or blood from other sources, sometimes human. They view it much as a diabetic needs insulin. Some of the world is born into this condition and needs to feed or they will become lethargic, sick, depressed and generally unhealthy. Vampires also show various degrees of empathy, sensitivity, and psychic ability in reference to the world around them. This specifically manifests in various different degrees depending on the individual. This causes some confusion about how the classifications are defined. Blake, I have been told that the three groupings are called sanguine, psi-vampires, and hybrids. Montague, one could also say Calyptos, Protophanes, and autogenes, except a few details tend to get switched around, but the specifics go something like this. Sanguine vampires need to feed of sources of blood either from humans or animals. This group includes various degree and types of individuals. They include sanguine without psychic abilities, sanguine with psychic abilities that each are considered true vampires. This group also includes people that are blood fetishists or in the BDSM community, and any other blood-drinking individuals that are not part of the true vampire bloodlines or born to being vampires. Psi-vampires need to feed of sources of psychic or pranic energy. Some are called psychic feeders. These individuals feed off the energies of others in order to sustain their own. They have no psychic ability beyond the feeding. Some are called psychic manipulators. These individuals are considered the more powerful psychic vampires. Not only can they take, feed, drain, they can manipulate that energy and wield it to their own psychic abilities. Hybrids have no primary feeding method, being able to feed either by the sanguine or psi methods, and may be psychic or manipulators also. They may change their feeding methods throughout the course of their lifetime. These fall into some other subcategories known to the communities, including those who feed by sexual contact, magic ritual, elemental energies, human auras, emotional energies, and ambient energies such as in crowds or public places. It should be made clear that modern vampires of any type, generally are individuals who have known what they are since very young. Just like any person with cultural differences, most lead lifestyles that are private and with individuals that share their understanding of what they are. Those who follow this lifestyle with care and keep it between willing partners and those who are not as kind right along to those who can be dangerous. Like life, you need to be careful of those around you. The world of vampires is no different. Blake, how so? Montague, most who practice these things tend to stay to themselves and do not try to cause harm to those not in their circles. Of course, you have exceptions, and that is why we all need to be aware of those around us. They choose partners and have friendships with others who they share their feeding rituals and lifestyle. It is no different than consenting adults in this way. This is representative of a large cross-section of the vampire community, and it is highly scorned when some individuals cause public problems for the whole wolf pack by their deviant behavior, as defined from a human point of view. Blake, The ancient and modern mythology of vampirism says that vampires are dependent upon drinking blood. Are you dependent on blood or any other substances to live? And since you seem to know a lot about the practices surrounding such blood rituals, what think about blood drinking? Montague, blood is a strong substance, highly addictive. The closest I could try to get to turning you would be through ingesting blood, even though that is not how it is done by firstborn like myself. It is by letting you drink my blood immediately after I have fed, so my energy is stronger and it would only get you addicted to tasting blood, it would not transform you. That may be true of all those who start to feed. I wish I had known this when I awakened to my bloodline subconscious without guidance long ago. Truth be, since the day that I first started feeding, I have had to continue, otherwise my autoimmune system weakens, and I can get physically ill very easily. I used to smoke and used to drink very heavily, but that is mostly as a result of trying to satisfy the cravings before I understood them. For the most part I only acted such addiction rituals for their sentimental attachments. I am not sure you can continue to be a substance addict once you have drunk human blood and really tasted it, and once the bloodline kicks in. Nothing will compare to it, and all other addictions, they will pale in comparison. This is where the bloodline thing really comes into importance. As a calyptos, being firstborn, your need for blood, be it human, animal, or now have some synthetic compounds that may replace human blood altogether, but it is not until your first attention awakens to your vampire self that you really feel the need, the hunger as it were. Now that may be different for others, I am only speaking firsthand. The fact is I can go for months of longer without feeding, it simply takes discipline. The once born and the star born actually do not need to feed this way at all. They are capable of various degrees of psionic vampirism. Some term them psi vampires. This is what makes these bloodlines even more off-kilter when they convince themselves that they need blood based on misinformation. As Protophanes, there is nothing worse than a psychologically imbalanced human being, who already sucks on the teat of other human emotions and empathy vampirically, who then convinces themselves they need to drink blood when they don't. Probably what happened to those kids playing that masquerade a few decades back, that and too much methamphetamine. The autogenes, as starborn, are the ones that really become dangerous. As autogenes they need the blood for their illusion and possession upon the host, and the host only needs psychic energy, but the indwelling entities convince the host that it needs blood to survive. But all three bloodlines do not need to feed the same ways, or for the same reasons. This is absolutely the truth, despite the many myths. Most of the blood drinking rituals are not necessary, but it is an unconsciously felt drive, one that is even worse if the individual is unaware of their origins. Blake, do you maintain ties with the greater vampire communities? If so, or if not, what is your opinion about such larger groups that gather and mingle for vampiric needs? Montague, personally, I do not ascribe to many traditional views or practices within the worldwide vampire communities. This is mostly due to my preference for solitude, but I am not the only vampire to have such preferences. Far from it in fact, but to answer your questioning better, I will stay on topic. In today's world, there are many different vampire groups and communities. They all belong to a loosely associated organization, an alliance of sorts, which basically helps and keeps the peace. The alliance members are worldwide. They abide by an ancient treaty, a treaty with many sections governing such things as conduct, relationships with humans, territorial ties, land disputes, political ties, and even bigger things like environmental issues. Laws and rules by which all are governed and sanctioned to be understood by all vampires. This is not a reality, but there is a great treaty agreed to by all legitimate clans and covens. This treaty is ratified and added to, every so often in large meetings held in Europe, Asia, the Orient, and yes, here in America as well. Those who run the world and govern themselves and others have their own political structure and substructure in both the human and vampire communities. Thus a code of conduct has been established long ago for the vampiric communities. so that they may exist and get along within the human world. This is known as the dictum or the black veil, as defined by the Orthodox vampiric religion, or what is known as Strigoi 7, keeping in mind that not all groups adhere to this group of laws, especially if they are Ronin like myself. Blake, Ronin. Montague, by that I mean alone, solitary, or left-hand path. Because I follow a solitary vampire path, I am not obligated to follow the rules of the clans or covens. I set my own laws, or lack thereof, by virtue of my free will being the ultimate judgment of my actions. I am vampire, I can choose to be a lone wolf, separate from the pack. Which is really the answer to your prior questioning, Blake, how long ago did these vampire laws become agreed to? Montague, those versed in Eastern philosophies, may notice similarities in the Black Veil, when compared to the Bushido Code. This comes from the great influence of the Japanese vampiric communities on the worldwide vampire construct. The first versions of the laws are believed to have first been spoken, more than 800 years ago originally, but this is a subject that has caused much disagreement in the greater vampire community. The subject is always bringing up what is known as the vampire prophecy. This is the supposed reasoning for the implementation of the first words of Black Veil laws upon all of the houses and covens of the vampiric communities. Yet this ancient prophecy is also why many feel the laws are either outdated or insufficient, or simply useless. There is a new generation that has entered the vampire communities since 2012 in particular. For the most part, the newer generation of vampire kids do not follow the conduct that is considered in keeping with the Black Veil laws, but also, they do not feel the need to keep secrecy or avoid being public about their vampiric tendencies. They also are less likely to care how they go about their pursuit of happiness as a vampire, for lack of a better metaphor. These are the kids that are part of the new magics, chaos theory, techno-paganism and apocalypse counterculture. They align differently in some ways, and even the old world vampire community recognizes this. The elder vampire community does not shun them, but also realize that they have wide implications that can impact the vampire culture as a whole. These new vampires may be the fulfillment of what is known as the vampire prophecy. Many of them are also from the Gothic lifestyle culture that embraces the fashion, music, and arts of the vampire communities. Again, these groups are accepted into the fold of the vampire community because they are outcasts like those that are considered real vampires. The vampire communities believe in the potentials, even of those who are not truly part of the dark gifted fold. Or as the ancient Sanskrit reads, loosely translated, Dar Tariki, Tarakat. Or in the darkness, the path. Blake, does the new generation of vampires actually cause problems in the greater community? Montague, not always problems per se, the new generation is more problematic, but only because their gifts manifest within a different construct, and this is often foreign to older world vampires in positions of power. New devices that have come with the invention of the internet, webcams and the voice command software are now available for psychic vampires to use. These technologies enable the psychic vampire to feed on unsuspecting people populating forums and chats. Those who do use the chat systems have all known people who roam from room to room causing problems wherever they go, trolling as it were. Some enter a chat room, bust into ongoing conversations, change the topic, start a nasty fight, argue with good people and then move on to the next room, leaving those in the rooms exhausted, unhappy and drained. They generally cause chaos, that is their modus operandi. Another problem exists in that many younger people involved in the vampire culture that have taken it over the line and fallen into unhealthy and dangerous limits. These kids probably just started out looking into something different from the norm but harmless to those not interested in what they practice, yet they saw a fulfillment of some other type of sick fantasy life. It is likely that these individuals have the vampiric tendencies, but they chose the path of denial and now prey upon others like themselves. These and other problems like drugs in the vampire community are why the Black Veil has been revised in this and the last century. Blake, since you brought it up, what are your opinions about drugs and alcohol? Montague, For the most part the same rules apply to the vampire world, as with anything in the norms of human perspective. A sober mind tends to behave in a more rational and less reckless way of living. As far as my vampire life has progressed, I found the abuse of other substances hardly compared to the new dependence I had acquired, but yes, I have had to temper myself in many ways similar to the drug addict in order to live a peaceful and quiet life. An addict, or a vampire, is equally lawless and likely to spur the common world by acting suspicious or needing to act out in ways that are illegal or morally frowned upon. Vampires must learn to toe the human lines of right and wrong. What point is long life if you end up locked in a prison for your many years? Vampires are very unlikely to survive such lockdown and not be discovered in such close quarters with humans, especially if they have acquired a real taste for human blood drinking as a survival mechanism. With the new generation, things are even more complex. For instance, there is the overwhelming influence of psychedelic drugs and other substances on the new generation. This is not to say the other generations have not had these problems, it is just more pronounced in the new generation. This new breed has more powerful drugs like methamphetamine and pharmaceuticals at their disposal. What happens to the different types of vampires if they are not able to drink blood when they need to, or engage in sexual activity, or drain the energy from someone else? Most can control their vampire lifestyle, but it has been known now and then for a vampire to do what is called vamping out, which is a nice way to say they jones or out when in need for their vampire energetic or blood fix. This combination of drug withdrawal and vamping out can cause them to do outlandish things until they can refuel the needs of their vampire selves. Blake4D, what do you think about crime in the modern world, especially murder? Montague, as I was already saying, everything is just an escalation. A morally reprehensible human is going to be an even more vile and unworthy vampire. I do not hunt humans, I attain blood from legally available sources or from others like myself to share. Murder is murder no matter what bloodlines you inherited from mommy and daddy. The new generation is not to blame for everything either. All vampires realize that vampires or not, these are problems within the whole generation of young people today. Human, vampire, or otherkin. Discussing the group problems within the communities is only my attempt to point out that there is a reality about the vampiric influence within this generation and the human population is publicly waving a blind eye to it. But the elder vampire community is not. What can be done about crime, violence and utter lawlessness? Those are questions being debated in our times, and the answers are not likely to be subtle or easy, for all those involved. Death impacts everything it touches, therefore, it should never be taken lightly. Death is the final darkness. As all vampires know. Blake, what is the vampire take on sex, be it heterosexuality, homosexuality and bisexuality? Montague, from the human perspective I suppose one might view the vampire as inherently bisexual, or asexual. Sexuality in the human sense is based on the quenching or fulfilling of those desires that are physical, hormonal, and procreative drives for the most part, and in some cases pathological and unhealthy ones at that. The determination of an individual with regard to sexual orientation is crucially based on many psychological factors and how they play out in the life of the individual prior to becoming sexually mature enough to experience these desires fully as a human adult. Maturity is a huge factor, as is if they are initiated properly into their sexual awakening. The same is true for the human who embarks upon the path of the becoming or even trying to become a vampire. For the most part, whatever hang-ups they had prior to any notions of vampiric tendencies became part of their life. These will also be factors as they become more engaged in what they think they are becoming. This is as sure a gauge as any if they are likely to be successful at their attempted transformation from the mortal coil in the human lifestyle they began from. A pathological human makes for an insane immortal, and not a very good candidate for the job either. But as far as a vampire, having a take on sex, I suppose it has little relevance, be it heterosexuality, homosexuality and bisexuality. Once the human has taken on the true nature of the path, most of those definitions are far less important, or at least should be. In the long haul, even those whom live longer than the average human is still seeking honesty, sobriety, friendship, companionship, and unconditional love. Especially if you plan to know a fellow vampire for more than a casual period of your lifespan. Definitely if you plan to live out an eternity or close to it. Blake, as a vampire, how has AIDS epidemic had impact upon you? Montague, I have been asked again so often, do you eat and drink items other than blood? To which I reply, of course, indeed I do. My physiology is human, and has all the needs of a human body, I just have more needs than the average human. So, is just as true the aspects of disease or afflictions of the body. Am I immortal in a literal sense, or will I die eventually like everything else that lives? I believe my soul is immortal, and yes, I believe I still have a soul, but when this body wears out or is damaged beyond the capability to go on, one day I will have had enough, and I suppose it too will die. I have a stronger immune system when I'm well fed, so I can fight disease, cure myself of simple wounds, sometimes even heal bones very rapidly, and in all bodily ailments I heal faster than any normal human. But, enough damage will still kill me. No, when it comes to autoimmune disease, as is still a new subjective kind of phenomenon, being a new order akin to blood diseases, things like AIDS and HIV. I have no proof, but I dare to speculate that they may be taking down the numbers of my kind, the calyptos, surely in the last decades. So many old ones do not keep up with the sciences enough and fall victim to new blood-borne agents of doom. Likewise, many vampires unnecessarily indulging in blood-drinking rituals and the like, but sheer stupidity are being infected with viruses that yes are killing more than a few of them off. But I already stated stupidity and immortality are not a good pairing, neither are narrow-mindedness and long lifetimes. So be it. Evolution always finds a way to thin down the herd. Yep, that is the kind of thing which is why we have all to be very careful. Life is precious, human, vampire, or otherwise. Blake, what is your religion, if any? Do you practice magic or the occult? Montague, religion may not be the right word for anything that I practice or believe in. For argument's sake, I definitely would be considered a practitioner of the dark arts. I wasn't perhaps the most spiritual person before I became self-aware, I in fact was morally pretty bankrupt. Suddenly I was no longer a mere puny human with no purpose, no influence. Suddenly I was a threat to everything that was a normal part of the world, I was a taboo in the world, and I was no longer someone simple and easily understood. I had become an enigma in paradox. But most of that came from reconciling my human and vampire lives into one being. I have studied Eastern, Western mysticism, martial arts, occult sciences, and much about primitive cultures, anthropology and native shamanism. Much of my time was finding out what was truth and what was lies from the Stoker traditions of Dracula-type mythology that I knew of. Things like sunlight does not kill me, only makes me a bit sluggish on the off days. That most of the crucifix, coffins, and churchy stuff is folklore related to the Black Plague influence on things. And if there are vampires that still believe or fear any of that, they come from a superstitious background before they ever became self-aware. Also, there have been many cults built around the vampires by humans, that are basically as much fact as Mother Goose in a brothel. The modern age is more enlightened than any as far as my studies have shown me. Harmonious alignment of the mind, body and spirit is the goal of anyone seeking afterlife or eternal life. The formula and the forms it takes are almost identical. Know thyself, atonement through balance, ever seeking and ever growing self-awareness and states of true equilibrium. If I have a religion, that is it. No sidestepping or fence-sitting, a middle path. Nothing good, nothing evil, balance. Forever and ever. Amen. Blake, what about others in the vampire community? Montague, some relate their vampirism to their spiritual faith. Modern vampires come from many walks of life and they're just as inclined as any other group to identify their condition with their religion. They may even incorporate this idea into their religion. This fact, however, does not make vampirism a religion, any more than being a vampire means that you're in a cult, that you worship Satan, or really mean anything else. Although vampires to most humans border on the edges of fiction and myth, these stories are based loosely on medical and scientific fact, as well. Every myth contains some sense of reality, and it is by understanding the distinction between that mythology and reality that we gain a deeper understanding of what we seek, more importantly what we are as a species. Modern vampirism is not based on the cultural myth of vampires, but it is based on the relationship intrinsic to the word vampire. In mythological terms, we refer to the vampire as a member of our society who feeds on that very same society to survive. This is the metaphor that is intended by the use of the word vampire by the modern vampire community, except it is used literally. This may not be religion in human terms, but it is dogma for the vampiric world and the laws governing it. Blake, have you ever undergone any kind of psychiatric evaluation? Or had any assessment of your mental state? Ever questioned your own sanity? Montague, me, myself, no, I do not question my sanity. I have stayed away from psychiatrists and doctors. Mostly I feel disgusted by the hypocrisy and close-minded nature of most clinical psychiatry. They would laugh at me, and classify me insane without hearing me out because they are afraid that what they have been taught. People are more afraid of what is inside their own minds than what is right in front of them. If something they see resembles something in their mind that scares them, they can become hysterical without even realizing what they are really afraid of. People make idle threats all the time, but I tend to keep my vampiric life hidden except to those who I know can handle it. It is odd, when it comes to my addiction to alcohol, I did attend a long period of programs related to 12 steps privately, and a number of others I have known have had similar affiliation with AA, OA, NA, and the like. I was friends with a woman who practiced a variation of Jungian psychology with New Age influences and were friends for many years. I also had a Catholic priest with whom I would play chess and discuss metaphysics and dogmatic questions with once a month as a very good friend for years. Both have now passed on. My lady friend never knew directly about my life. My Catholic father figure was the one who told me he knew, to my surprise. Both, I believe, were role models for my growth, and both gave me great insight into how to be the best of my human and vampire natures. Do other people in the world, people reading this interview, question my sanity? Undoubtedly so. Blake, what if anything is seen as moral or immoral, by you or vampires generally? Montague, I try not to define things in the sense of moral or immoral, but I have my dislikes, and they are simple. Above anything I dislike is chaos, for it is an agent that breeds of itself. Especially chaotic actions that have no purpose other than creating more chaos. The world is desperate for two things, in my opinion: truth and order. Chaos and those who would spread it without good reason are something worse than anyone with good or evil intentions creates. Chaos is indifferent and destructive almost always. Even today in the world, the influence of chaos always seems to dominate over rational order. Terrorism, for example, often starts with the intentions of having a spiritual message or goal, but in the end, it just ends up causing lawlessness and chaotic stirring of the pot. Nothing of the original goal is left once someone blows themselves up with a bomb, killing the innocent, and committing a suicidal act publicly. I suppose the idea is to make that explicit public statement so that it cannot be denied, but the message is lost and spreads more ignorance, prejudice and chaos. To me, chaos can always be surely followed by its brethren, violence and stupidity. Good sometimes uses violence with the aim to end future violence. Evil sometimes uses violence with the aim to bring order. Both fail or succeed in proportion with their goals about equally, but at least there was purpose and thought behind their worst intent. Chaos does not align with sides, it wants all or nothing, and in the end usually it wants nothing at all. Nothing ever appeases the desires of the chaotic. War is dark, destructive, and yet still an attempt at bringing order out of already existing chaos. Chaos would never wage a war with sides, it would rather blow the world up in one grand hail of fire and doom. Einstein did not want to make the atomic bomb, not for fear of what men in his time would do with it, but rather what the chaotic men of future world powers would surely seek to misuse it for. Even Hitler was more aligned with evil and sought domination through a new world order. His goal was not destruction of everything, at least at first. Blake, do you believe in sin? Montague, I believe you must atone within yourself for all that you do, or it will haunt and rule you soul deep. Even if you actively pass off what you have done in life smiling all the way, your inner child, your deepest darkest corners, your primitive mind remembers all. And it feels the guilt that you pretend you do not. You must reconcile this guilt or it very quickly begins to change who you are, and soon you are not in control of your life, your actions, or your mind. This is the concept behind sin in most all religions, and they were not wrong to recognize its power. For it is a great darkness, the life that is unexamined. Sin is the devil, the karmic demon, and is responsible for the perpetuation of more sins, and the lies attempting to cover them over. It is a messy business when someone is living lies upon lies. Evil for the most part views lying as weak. Again we come back to my one prejudice. Lying is a symptom of chaotic thinking. Living in sin may be right or wrong depending upon perspectives held by the individual, but choosing to live with guilt or sin unresolved is just another mask for insanity. Blake, what would you say to someone who tells you that they want to become a vampire? Montague, first response, you are an idiot. Second response, what kind of an idiot are you exactly? Third response, why don't you ponder your wishes for a few decades, then we can talk some more. Last response, no you don't. Blake, why would you say those things, especially to someone that is sincere about their wishes? Montague, because most desire, if not all desire, has a basis in illusion. This is particularly true with humans that become obsessed with being something else, like an angel, or an alien from outer space, or an immortal vampire. It is not what you believe it to be. You do not want to become a vampire for any of the reasons your human brain can come up with. Nor should you wish to become anything that you are not, period. You are human, spend your time on this planet Earth Mother bettering yourself. That will make you much happier than anything the dark gifts could bring. You were born with life and spirit, blood flowing in your veins, and the ability to dream dreams. Start with these wondrous gifts, before you trade them for something that is not what you think it is. Blake4D, Hollywood and the media are the main source of most modern vampire lore. What do you think of their handling of the vampire mythology? Montague, the world as viewed through the media is an illusion at best. Nothing produced in television, or the entertainment elite in general is trying to produce truth anymore. I am not saying that the media has no purpose or any merits, but is mainly through the art of deceptive artistry, not truth-telling. Media has its strongest-handed suit in its ability to tell truthful information in a way that seems implausible and unbelievable. I have witnessed many surprising truthful stories being told in the guise of fictional accounts, or news stories that are actually relaying amazingly honest information under the cover of the arts or humor. But straightforward honesty, the media is like the goddess Media that she was named after, at best a madness upon the human mind, at worst a blind idol-worshipping weaver of lies and cloaks and deceptive purposes. Media is the counterbalance to reality in the age of information. The internet perhaps has a bit more honesty due to its undercurrent of the individuals that wield its swords, but only on a basic level is it any better for the most part, and that shall not likely last long, for the world changes faster than we are ever prepared to keep up with. As far as vampires and vampirism goes, the media treats us no better than criminals or clowns. Take your pick. And this is actually more the cause of the dangerous side of things, because there are people who want to become like me without knowing what it is really like, In fact, the ignorant Americanization of the vampire legend has blown it even more out of proportion than the Romans, the Egyptians, or the Catholic Church did in the Middle Ages. Nothing but candy-coated bloodlust is cultivated by such stupidity. And those who seek that kind of immortality or the like are unlikely to be much better or deserving of power than their aspirations make them. Stupidity is bad enough for immortal life, a species of superior and stupid immortals. I would not wish such a thing upon humanity, the universe, and certainly not the great Earth Mother. She has enough to deal with as it is in this new millennial world with all of its disorder and conflict. Blake, thank you Montague. Would you like to add anything in closing? Montague, just this perhaps, keep in mind whatever your place in the world, that most things are about control, something you rarely if ever can attain in reality. The hierarchy of the church, the men of science, even the philosophers, and harbingers of medicine denounced my kindred, the vampire, as evil because they couldn't control us, or non-existent because they would not have anyone else be in control. Be as open to the real world as you can, and not just the facts presented, not just that happy little fantasy bubble, the one that is created to keep the sheep lower in rank, so that the wolves can give orders when to form a line. They claim vampires are to be feared. The church claims that dangerous and wicked humans are to be feared as well. The power and the source are controlled daily by those whose iron fists rule through fear. Fear of hell and damnation if its bidding is not done in life, fear of heaven and being held back from enlightenment for not being prepared enough to do well in the afterlife. We just chose to ignore it because we see them for who they are, and what they are doing. To the closed-minded this is called a reality, but to those madmen so human, those wise women and witches, to the saints and the sorcerers, the hunters and gatherers, to the sons and daughters of humankind and all their fairies in wild heated tantrums by beating drums, all the wild things that are the children of the blind idiot God and the planet Earth Mother, accept nothing, for nothing is sacred. I, vampire, am not an enemy of the humankind. I am an ally, in the one truth, the one law, that ever shall we that live fight, for the freedom to live, and to live choose if we die. Love is the will, love under law. Forever and ever. Amen. I hope all your readers approach their own paths with equally honorable intent. In conclusion, I want to thank Montague for his time and patience. It is not easy to get anyone to talk candidly about this subject. He instructed me to tell the readers that there are many traditionally vampire subject matter that if we conveniently ignored them altogether, that perhaps they are trivial details anyway. We attempted to discuss things from a non-mythological point of view. And a modern enlightened view as well. You can read about wooden stakes, garlic, and holy water elsewhere. Let alone most who would want to are not the most stable or sane individuals in this interviewer's humble experience. For anyone reading, I cannot pass on any communications with Montague or anyone connected with him. I cannot get your emails or other information passed to anyone who is a vampire, nor will I help to facilitate such communications in any way. Do not bother. If this is truly your path, you will have your own natural way that you find to it. For the most part, those who walk it do not want to be known, or have their privacy interrupted with such trivial fan mail or idol worship. If they do, they may not be what you think they are. And you must be careful what you wish for you are likely to find it all too easily for your own good. Vampirism is not a cult to be followed, a club to be joined, or a novel passing fancy for the weak-minded. It is the furthest end of the left-hand paths, and the darkest of the dark arts. The few that travel it do not have time for the sightseers of the occult, nor should they. I appreciate Montague taking this interview seriously, and I have tried to do the same. I hope it has been informative and educational. And if you want to explore more esoteric aspects of the vampire lore, Stoker, Lovecraft, Summers, Crowley, D. Murray, Gardner, Barker, and a host of others have already laid a wonderful groundwork of literature that deserves to be read. Imperium et Nil, the empire never ended. Wishing all fellow travelers, the best. Lest be. Many ideas expressed here by Montague are relative to teachings in the Nag Hammadi Gospels, or the Gnostic teachings alternative to Christianity and other religious cults from the past few thousand years and until now. An audio transcription of the Nag Hammadi text is made available for the reader. Subscribe to Medium and show your support.